So talking a little bit about the objectives, we wanted to make sure that we built on that strong educational foundation and strategy, understanding that elementary schools really are the priority in terms of 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 what we've learned based on overcrowding and the poor state of their infrastructure. Meaningful improvements also certainly are needed at the high school, and so that is part of any plan. Naturally, we're going to continue to invest in coal so that it remains the prize building that it is, and slowly manage student population growth as we look to the future. The other thing that's come up over and over again and comes up as we talk about these options are making sure that the schools continue to be great community resources. So lots of things heading into this. In terms of things that we looked at and things that we'll talk about with each of the options, we wanted to understand site constraints to figure out where we could actually build. We wanted to understand traffic and impact on the community. And ultimately, we wanted to just provide a little bit of a picture of what might actually be feasible. In terms of kind of additional notes on feasibility, educational program obviously is part of that, and ultimately cost and value. So I spoke a little bit in my last segment about town council being great partners and getting ready to set a number as a not to exceed as the numbers are continued to be analyzed. And a huge thank you to members of town council. Some of them are in the audience this evening, as well as the town manager for the partnership with the school committee, building committee, and school department as the outside advisor. It gives me great joy to see leadership at both the town and school working so closely together. The communities that really are able to find common ground and vision do really wonderful things when it comes to major capital investment. And you're all very fortunate and that you have spectacular leadership both at town hall and in the schools. So it's a pleasure to work with you. In terms of the options themselves, we've broken this down into 3 options. I will begin a bit with the end in mind and say at this sort of state in our community outreach, I'm going to go through each of these. I'm going to talk about their kind of constructability. I'm going to talk a little bit about traffic. I'm going to talk a little bit about enrollment and grade configuration, but I also want to start by telling you that based on the feedback we've received to date, likely it appears that the community is headed towards option C. I, by all means, though, welcome any and all feedback this evening during the Q&A. Ultimately, what's going to make this project successful is not only that great partnership that I was just talking about between Town Hall and the school department, but also you all being really informed and involved and excited and passionate about what the future of schools here in East Greenwich will be. So please don't hold back, so long as it's respectful, and I'd love to have comments later this evening. So if we start with option A, that starts to talk about the potential new build on the Frenchtown site and moving all of your students, grade 3 to 5, into a new building at Frenchtown. So essentially you'd matriculate up through early ed. Everyone would then be centrally located at Frenchtown, followed by the middle school and the high school. The second piece of option A suggests that perhaps we need an addition renovation to house grades K2 at Hannaford, an addition renovation to also pick up pre-K and do pre-K to 2 at Meadowbrook, and ultimately close Eldredge as a school. So we'll talk a little bit about Eldredge, a little bit more about Eldredge this evening and likely during the Q&A, but this will be a theme that you see emergent in all 3 options. So if we look about what that means in terms of Frenchtown in this option, basically, and many of these things will be the same in all options. This is Frenchtown Road. This is the existing building. This is the new school. I should say, a proposed new school. I should say that in every case, these are diagrams only. This is by no means the final shape of the building, the final layout of the site, or any of those things, but this is really meant to test, do these concepts work in every case? And as you see in this case, in option A, taking grades 3 to 5 results in a 600 student school, with the school being constructed just back on site from where it is today. We find no major site constraints, adequate accommodations to incorporate a construction period, and with the ultimate restoration of the fields, high future community use. Sticking with option A and talking a little bit about Hannaford, in order to accomplish this, we will need some flex. So what this shows is the existing school with an addition off to the side. We understand that there are some soils concerns as well as site concerns with forested wetlands that we're trying to avoid, and likely to make this achievable. If I go back to the previous slide, once a new French town comes up and is built, more than likely the existing building would stay for some period in the scheme, such that we could essentially vacate Hannaford to allow this construction to occur, and the student population otherwise slated for Hannaford would be in the old Frenchtown school until they're ready to move into their newly renovated building. So a little bit tricky, and you'll see Frenchtown really is the catalyst for much of this work being able to occur, such that during any construction period, in all options that we're going to talk about, we're able to swing students out of buildings so they are not living in a school that is also a construction site. It's not impossible to do construction projects at an operational building, but it is certainly not ideal for teaching and learning, and certainly not for elementary students. Continuing with option A, this is Meadowbrook, and starting to talk about if we were to try and house 350 students at Meadowbrook, what we would need to do. And very similarly, we'd be looking at additions on either side, needing to find swing space during construction. So again, likely looking to one of the other sites while this were to occur. If I now move to option B, we start to take a little bit of a more serious look at broader consolidation. So again, option A, Eldredge came offline, consolidation started to start, and grade alignment is not so dissimilar to what it is now. Option B is a more severe consolidation where there are new builds both at Frenchtown and Hannaford that would pick up pre-K all the way through 5. And not only would Eldredge close in this case, but Meadowbrook would close as well. In terms of impact here, what this means, if we're housing students pre-K to 5, we end up with 600 student schools. Similarly, there'd be a conceptual new build while the existing one is maintained, likely maintained to potentially swing other students as needed, ultimately coming back down for future field and community use. Very same thing, but in this case, contemplating a new build on the Frenchtown site. This is the line of the existing school. So in this case, also able to likely erect a new school while the existing is operational and separated from the construction site, ultimately moving students over, and what was field space here would be recaptured on the other side of the site. Then we start to look at option C, and really what option C did was look at grade alignment a little bit differently, react a bit to the idea that perhaps transporting all students to a centralized location as an option A may not be ideal. Closing 2 schools as an option B may not be ideal. And option C kind of sprung forth an additional idea that perhaps renovations at Meadowbrook would allow you to create an early child learning center. So if we build slightly smaller new schools on the Frenchtown and Hannaford sites, grades 1 through 5, and then renovate Meadowbrook to house all pre-KK, that gives you future expansion space should you choose to expand your pre-K program, or if at some point it becomes mandated that all students have access to pre-K, there would be space in that building to do so. Again, Eldredge closes in this option. So again, trying to understand the feasibility of this, very similar to the other concepts we've looked at, still building Frenchtown further back on the site, providing some swing space, in this case, likely for Meadowbrook, eventually comes down, becomes fields. Hannaford, similarly, we talked about both of these schools, Frenchtown and Hannaford being 500 student schools, grades 1 through 5, the new build, eventually the existing building comes down. While those 2 things are happening, one or both, depending upon schedule, existing schools would remain in place, so we can move the student population that's currently in Meadowbrook out of Meadowbrook to create renovations for your early childhood learning center. Really, the idea here is we want to make this as convenient as possible. Construction is never entirely convenient, but really want to make sure that the impact to the community is low in all of these cases, the impact to teaching and learning is low, and that we're really able to maximize benefit and minimize impact in terms of nuisance to the community as well as the schools. So if we talk a little bit about traffic, because we're talking about building slightly larger schools than what you have today on some of these sites, we wanted to kind of understand where these buildings sit currently, how the traffic patterns work, and how this work may affect how residents in a more broad way could be impacted by this work. So again, if we're looking at Frenchtown, here's Frenchtown Road, here's the existing building, here's the proposed new build. And a little bit look of kind of Frenchtown Road and what that is. We know that Frenchtown Road is not necessarily a road in which students are walking to school anyway now. It's not particularly user-friendly from a walking perspective, but is absolutely in a neighborhood setting. So what does that really mean? So if we look at the existing condition of Frenchtown, and we think in particular about traffic impact on Frenchtown Road, having spoken to folks at Frenchtown and folks across the district, I would say the uniform feedback coming back to me from every site is essentially pick up and drop off is a painful experience in all of these schools. And we can start to understand why when we look at the community streets that they're on, the limited parking and access to the schools as they exist now, in this case, Frenchtown, and kind of the chaos that creates during pickup drop off and sort of any major events outside. So if we start to look at what the new proposed plan could offer, this is where the existing building was. Here's Frenchtown Road. By kind of keeping similar parking at the front, we've provided a place for people to pull off into the site. There's parking for athletic fields. We then have a fairly long access drive, allowing for queuing and safe entering and exiting of the site, parking supporting a new building in some shape and form, segregated parking for busing, creating a safer situation, which could be parking or other to support these fields in the back in the future when buses are not using this area. But the idea is that we want to take all of school-based traffic off of the community streets, create for a safer pickup drop off and weekend and after school activity, and really do everything we can to improve the site conditions. And so here's just kind of an example of what that could look like at Frenchtown. If we kind of look at the same analysis on Hannaford, probably no one's surprised that similarly, we're looking at very residential streets, looking at the new building, the existing, what the existing drive path looks like. Here it is again. And here it is improved. So in an ad reno scheme, we're probably not able to completely alleviate traffic off of neighborhood streets, but trying to do better with parking, trying to do better with circulation, keeping buses separate, making it a safer site, making it a less inconvenient site in the morning and the afternoon. Similarly, with a new build, we have a bit more flexibility here, where the old school, the existing school is sitting here, with the new one potentially positioned back a bit. We can do more with busing, supporting the athletic field, more with queuing, more with parking, supporting the new school, creating a safer and more user-friendly environment. So if we talk a little bit about the overall program impact, again, in option A, it's really about taking some of your younger learners, pre-K to 2, and splitting them between Hannaford and Meadowbrook, then taking everyone in the district 3rd grade on and sending them to Frenchtown. Starting to try and understand equity, trying to understand ideal matriculation through the schools, and just kind of some of the things that this brings up. One of the principal concerns that this brought up as we were really looking at it is this creates, as does option B, a fairly large school, and we're taking everyone at a fairly young age and sending them to a central location. Option B, similarly, we're taking everyone from pre-K and sending them to 2 central locations, resulting in 2 fairly large schools. Option C reduces the size of the schools a little bit and creates dedicated pre-K space, kind of working with a manageable number of school transitions, a manageable size of schools, trying to keep schools at least more proximate to people's neighborhoods than they might otherwise be, especially in B, when we'd be talking about sending them to 2 facilities. And then from this, and I went a little too fast, as budget starts to come into focus and we talk about kind of what was happening in option C, we split this now between options C1 and C2. So C1 is, as you understand it, it's Frenchtown 1.5, Hannaford 1.5, Meadowbrook pre-KK. Frenchtown and Hannaford are new builds, Meadowbrook is renovations. Should cost start to become a concern in terms of the overall cost, so kind of bonding, debt impact, we started to look at a model where perhaps instead of building new both at Frenchtown and Hannaford, use the existing Hannaford building, complete addition and renovations on that site, potentially lowering costs, but maintaining sort of the same academic pathway and sequencing. So in terms of estimates, I think it's really important to disclose that there have been a number of numbers provided over the life of these projects. Where we are now is we're taking the best information that we have at this time to project forward. So within the last month or two, new numbers have been provided that essentially provide probable cost estimating for each of these schemes. Town council is at this point aware of those numbers. The town manager and town finance have started to analyze impact in terms of potential spend. And we're really at this point just starting to dig into the numbers, but it's important to realize that we're still very much at a conceptual level. The accuracy of these costs will improve as we go forward, but the costs are intended to pick up everything. So the costs are total project costs. They don't pick up just the construction itself, but a myriad of other fees and expenses that become the soft costs, as well as furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So really looking at these projects as holistic total budgets with a slightly conservative view to make sure that you actually do have the funding you need to proceed and be successful. The last note on here, I think, is kind of a nod to the idea that a year ago, people probably wouldn't have expected, or certainly not everyone at least, would have expected that inflation would be beyond 7%. We, of course, are projecting out conservatively, knowing that escalation will continue, but depending upon what happens from the macroeconomic level, things are still subject to change, and these will be fluid as we continue to discuss this going forward. So looking a little bit at the latest cost estimates, as option A started to fall off, we focused really on options B and C. So option B suggests that the new builds at Hannaford and Frenchtown would require $64 million each, and that we would need to appropriate at least $20 million to the high school, getting us a total budget of $148 million. Option C1 that we talked a little bit about, the differences between C1 and C2. C1 are slightly smaller schools. Remember, these were 600 student schools in option B. In C, Hannaford and Frenchtown are 500 student schools, so a little bit less expensive, $57 million each. Renovations at Meadowbrook to create that early childhood learning center, $16 million, and still an appropriation line hold of $20 million for the high school, bringing our total budget for option C1 to $150 million. Then looking at option C2, again, the real only change here is contemplating an addition renovation as opposed to new build on the Hannaford site, produces an approximate $20 million in savings, bringing our total budget to $130 million. Just a quick look back and final reminder, at this point, I'm very familiar with these options, but I know for some of you, you may be seeing them for the first time this evening. It does appear for a number of reasons that the community is starting to kind of align with option C, but as a reminder, option A centrally locates grades 3 to 5 in a 600 student school at Frenchtown. We've got ad renos at Meadowbrook and Hannaford. Eldredge is closed. Option B, fairly substantial new builds at Frenchtown and Hannaford, both Eldredge and Meadowbrook close. And option C, in this case, I think C1, New builds at Frenchtown and Hannaford, grades 1 through 5, reno at Meadowbrook Early Childhood, Eldredge closes. And so now I'm going to hand it over, I think, to Mr. Pedraza and Bob Wilmarth to talk a little bit about high school improvements and the work that your own students did, as well as what we're planning.
Thank you so much. So I will try to be as thorough as possible, but also recognize that folks have been sitting for quite some time. So I will try and get through this, but also go through, it's also indicative of some of the changes that educationally we need to make. We don't want our students sitting for hours and hours looking at words on a wall. There are better ways to learn. We need to make sure that we have flexibility so that we can both get direct instruction, but then have direct experiences, then have time and space to break up, to have both loud and quiet conversations. So I'll try and be thorough, but some of the themes that have been talked about already would be a little bit redundant. But the other piece that I want to talk about is the high school itself, and even dating back to this building. So while we didn't get everything that we wanted or potentially needed, the high school has seen renovation, significant renovation, that helped bring it into the 21st century. Almost every single one of the high school labs has a collegiate level laboratory geared towards either the biological or chemical sciences. We've put in safety and security measures and continue to do so. We've reconfigured, but there's so much more that we want, and in many cases need to do. East Greenwich High School is the hub of this community. We take great pride in it. We have Avenger spirit. We're here tonight, in many cases, because of it. Whether you started at pre-K at Meadowbrook and went through Eldredge and or just moved into the community. In many cases, you're doing so because of East Greenwich High School. And even if you don't go to East Greenwich High School, chances are you're using the facilities. You're doing EGBA. You're doing youth baseball, basketball. You are involved. You're getting dropped off to see our Avengers on the gridiron, play lacrosse, play tennis, win state championships. So within those objectives, we want to make sure that the athletic spaces that are communally used are reconfigured and maximized. But also, PE health isn't the same anymore. It's not, hey, let's all get together and just play basketball. Sorry, guys, you're running the pacer. The most popular, one of the most highly requested courses at East Greenwich High School is personal fitness. And that's so I can devise my own fitness plan personally, so that I can be in treadmills, so that I can work with teammates, so that I can do things individually and work that way. And we see Mr. Florio and we see Mrs. Harvey creating lessons that are about personal health as well as community and teams that then expand into athletics. And if you've ever been to East Greenwich High School, I hope you've enjoyed those contests, but I'm pretty sure you've never been into the locker rooms. And as our athletes, some of our athletes are here today, they are shaking their heads. They are in the locker rooms because they have to be, but talk about spaces that are not maximized, because to call them Spartan would be an insult to Spartans. They're gross. Communal, wide open showers that have not been used in decades. Team rooms that we have to convert or go over to officials. Athletic rooms, boys' locker rooms that have 2 team rooms. Our ladies' facilities, 0. However, our ladies have won more state championships lately. There's not even equality, never mind equity, in the spaces that we're providing, or that we could and should be providing. In terms of, let's get off the athletic stage and get onto literally the stage. We have to run 2 nights of talent shows. We have 2 casts for our shows, because we have so many talented students that you give us and whose talents are nurtured, that we, again, have 2 different casts, 4 different shows, different roles. And that's not, hey, everybody gets a trophy and so we need to no, that's because we have so many talented children, young adults, not children, but even children, because the spaces that we have for those in other schools don't suffice or even meet their demand. So they must come to East Greenwich High School and sit in tattered chairs and go off of speaker systems that had to be replaced because the church that rented them, that rented the space, took their speakers with them, and we don't have them. That's not what I think of when I think of East Greenwich High School or East Greenwich. And it's not what you do either, but that's our realities, and that's what we need to fix. And that's what we will fix, even with $20 million. In terms of other things, is thinking creative, being flexible. How many times have you used your locker this year? They don't have one, don't use lockers. So we have empty spaces. So again, East Greenwich High School, the bones are fantastic. It would, I don't know, I don't even want to know how much it would take to tear that place down. Probably costs more than to rebuild it nowadays. The bones are great. However, the spaces are not conducive. That it's a hodgepodge. It reflects the piecemeal pieces that we've done, and in doing so, in trying to meet our immediate demands, we've missed opportunities, and the $20 million will allow us to reclaim some of those opportunities to maximize not only the space, but also maintain tax and be honorable to taxpayer dollars. We are not looking to build the Taj Mahal. We are not looking for reclining seats. We are looking to put forward what the community and our students deserve, but at the same time, also reflect how learning is now done. They don't use lockers. Were you in the hallways? Did you do any group work? Where'd you do group? When was the last time you did group work in the hallway? 2 days ago, group work in the hallways. So what we could do is we can take out some of those lockers and we can make tables that come on down and make charging stations. Okay, is it ideal? No, but is it maximizing what we have? Yes. And do we have to do it? Yes, because the way RIDE creates the funding formula or desire for space, it counts our 2 gyms and all of the classrooms as instructional square footage. And so we have these 2 huge gyms, and so RIDE then says, oh, what do you, East Greenwich High School, let's do the calculation divided by the students you have. It counts the gym. That might not be in use. That's in use only for PE classes or only for certain activities. So it's about maximizing the spaces that we do have. And the bottom one, replacing lockers, is again, we're trying to be innovative. Again, one of the first districts to be one-to-one, thank goodness we were before the pandemic. The other piece is to reconfigure current spaces according to student need. This need has been going on for a long time. We just mentioned NEASC and them wrapping up their decennial visit. Their last decennial visit, we were cited because of the locker rooms that still have not been fixed. We were only able to get off of that with a special report that I had to write at the time as principal because we had blueprints that we were able to submit, and they said, okay, you're making progress, you're putting in your effort. It is now 10 years later, and we are still looking at blueprints, and the cost has gone up. So we need to do that for things that we haven't done, as well, though, as to continue doing things that we have done. So we have started to make sure that we're leading with all students in mind. And so we've had to take over spaces, and we've wanted to take over spaces so that our learners are getting what they need. And in doing so, though, there's only so much space. So we've started to expand the intensive special ed, and it's taken over other classrooms. What used to be the photography room and digital photography, we've moved that to another area because we've expanded student services. But we've done so, why? Dark rooms aren't used anymore. It used to be photo 1 started with film. Now, I don't even know. Actually, you might get to film in photo 3. We've flipped that. However, what those rooms were, is they had the electricity, had the sewage, had the drainage, had all of the things there. And so now we've continued to grow that with our population. And quite frankly, we've continued and we're outgrowing it. So we're going to continue. The key here is continue to renovate the art spaces. So the digital design and photography rooms that have been pushed out, and that as we expand, that we're going to create new spaces to move those programs into, because the demand for those and our commitment to students in the arts, in CTE, thanks to Mrs. Page, whether in her capacity as Applied Arts Department Chair or as principal of East Greenwich High School, is only growing. But now that we actually have CTE space programs, now we can devise spaces. Now we can talk about specific technology. Now we can talk about dressing rooms for the arts. Now we can talk about engineering and technology platforms necessary. We're not, because East Greenwich High School is running their CTE programs, we're not hosting Warwick and the aviation. So again, these are things that while we don't have in some cases, the specifics aren't there. If the specifics aren't there because we're continuing to evolve and we're continuing to be flexible based off of our students' needs. And that is one thing that's not going to ever discontinue. So the other piece of this is, as we've been going through, so 10 years ago, as part of NEASC, worked with Mr. Wilmarth, got the blueprints, sent them off to NEASC. But now it was time for master planning, and we had architects, engineers, all kind of going. The real heart and soul of East Greenwich High School isn't the building. It's what's done in the building, and it's what and who the students are. So we turned that over to the students. And what did they tell us, and what did they design? It's what's before you today. Places to get together, places to congregate, places, classrooms that are big enough and flexible enough that we can move a wall, or that as I do something called, or teachers put in station rotation, that I've got enough space. Again, all the things that our elementary students need, our secondary students, the largest students in the district, could also benefit from. And so designing spaces that meet those needs and those demands, not for comfier chairs and better technology to read words on a wall, but to take the words on the wall and put it into their hands and let them work with it, which is what our next phase of community outreach will be. And I encourage everybody to do. Come see East Greenwich High School. The facility, you'll be surprised by. Our students who will help lead those tours, you'll be even more surprised by, but on the opposite end of the spectrum, how amazing they are. And again, ultimately what they deserve. But you already know that because they're your children, they're your grandchildren. But the key is that we, and they know, and they've designed with those ideas, learning flexibilities. Let's take the upstairs gym that counts as square footage, and let's find a way to make that health and PE fitness. Instead of going, hey, is the bench press over in this corner in this room? Or is it over here in what was designed to be the football team room that doesn't have adequate ventilation? Oh, where's the one squat rack? Where are the two bench presses? Where's the trainer? Where's the wrestling room that all of a sudden now has health classrooms in it and has the mat pulled up? Again, everything done with the best intention and everything done under what we need and what people deserve and what we must get across. But again, come see it, come experience it, come learn by doing, and you'll see the real investment in terms of dollars is well worth it. And we'll show you, as Mr. Wilmarth will go through the blueprints and show you how far, although it seems comparative to all the great things that our students and teachers and educators accomplish every single day, that 20 million doesn't seem like a lot. Again, through our creativity, flexibility, as well as Mr. Wilmarth's consistent leadership of maintaining the bones of that building, we're able to build off things that allow us to keep costs down, being cognizant to you, the taxpayers, and treating every dollar you give us with absolute fidelity. So building off of existing spaces. Why? Because electricity is already there. Because we could open up spaces and build off that, we don't change the footprint of the building too much. That ride goes, non-reimbursable. All of those things have gone into mind, and I think that you'll see them coming up in the diagrams that Mr. Wilmarth will go through. So again, we're looking to reorganize the space that's already there. Again, we have stairwells that go to nowhere. We have spin bikes and hallways. We have things that were donated to us that we don't have spaces for. And again, we can do better. So again, all of the things here, the whole core though, and ultimately what it will come back to is as you go through and take in all of the information here, and as I show you words on a wall and unfortunately talk at you for now, we're being true to our strategic plan. We're being true to every student, not just the athletes, not just students with special needs, every student at East Greenwich High School and every community member, whether you send your children here, did send your children here, or will continue to. So again, everything that you'll see right now will, in the end, all be designed with what's best for all students and what improves the quality of life that you want, not only for your children, but your children's children. And so with that, let Mr. Wilmarth take the soapbox.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Not really great at doing these presentations, but I'm going to stumble my way through. Hopefully you can all bear with me here. I don't know how many folks remember what the building looked like when it was originally built. Probably a few people here, right? But this is the front entrance, the red dot, right? And when the building was built, there was a set of stairs that walked you down here underneath what used to be the main office, and you would walk into the central courtyard, which is basically the entrance to the building. It was an open style campus. You had two buildings, one in this corner and one in this corner with the classroom wing. Since the building was built and over the course of time, I don't know how many other folks here might remember that the floor tiles all used to be brown, right? Anybody remember the brown floor tiles with the big wear holes in them? Nobody remembers. Somebody remembers. Over the past 25 years, we've made a lot of strategic improvements to the building. The flooring was all replaced, the ceilings have been painted, the walls repainted, and that's the cosmetic stuff. This wing over here houses all the science labs. That was completely renovated back when this building was built, about 2009. Prior to that, we had an $8 million bond, which basically focused on things at the high school. The heating and ventilating units and all of the spaces were replaced at that time. All of the main casework in the classrooms was replaced along with the windows to make them more energy efficient. In 2009, this science wing was renovated. The media center was renovated. The office areas that are here on the second floor were turned into the guidance area, and new offices were built here along with the front portico. Prior to that, obviously, the construction of the new gym was just prior to the $8 million bond for facilities. So things that came up during that time when we were brainstorming about what this building was going to look like and what the really first stage of the district master plan that we're looking at today were things that were envisioned for the high school, such as areas for the performing arts, areas for music, the dire need for the art spaces, which are in this area, to be updated, along with athletics and other things. We had some budgetary restrictions that we had to make at the time. We focused our energy here at Cole, along with desperate renovations that were needed at the elementary schools. If folks here in the room recall, we had an outstanding balance of $60 to $70 million in deferred maintenance at the time that we were configuring this building. That number is now whittled down to 22, thanks to the investments that we've made throughout the district. With this set of renovations and this set of additions, we're going to whittle that number down to practically nothing, and we'll be in really good shape in the future to keep carrying on with buildings that are be continually maintained, hopefully in the future. When looking at this space, some of the areas that we needed to do or work that we needed to complete in would be, number one, the locker rooms, and number two, the special ed spaces. Let me see if I can forward. The area here is what we like to refer to as underground storage. I don't know if anybody's seen or been through underground storage, right? Like a non-lighted storage space where we're holding all the stuff that the building needs. So this is a huge area of uncaptured space that we're essentially just using for storage in the building right now that is going to be turned into the spaces that you see here, along with the locker rooms. Let me jump ahead to the next slide. So here's what the locker rooms look like now, right? They're not in really great shape. This picture down here is the girls' locker room, which is not in much better shape than the boys' locker room. And these locker rooms were designed in a time where when you went to gym class, everybody had their own locker where they stored their gym stuff all year long. You change your shoes, you change your clothes. After gym class, you showered, and then you went back to class. That simply doesn't happen anymore. And so we have these giant areas filled with lockers that nobody uses, and this giant area of showers, again, that nobody uses, and the space is all wasted. In the girls' locker room, it's a little bit different. They have these female corrals. They're sort of private changing rooms where I guess the girls would go and change, but again, nobody really changes for gym class anymore, and certainly nobody showers. This is what we want to make the locker rooms look like. So on the right hand side, this is the boys' side. It's the boys' side now. It'll remain being the boys' side in the future. The girls' side over here. You've got small areas for changing, and small areas for showering, but you've got team rooms now that are in here. This area here is what is now the weight room, which is a very small room. In the future, you know, this is something that could be configured into something like a yoga space or something along those lines. The area in here, we're converting from what is basically an extension to the weight room into the PE offices. And in the boys' room, you've got similar team locker rooms along with a changing area for the boys and the bathroom facilities that are needed in the locker rooms. The areas down here, this is your existing trainer's office. This is the existing visitors team locker room. This is the existing officials changing area when you have outside officials come in. This is what we're hoping to make the locker room into, a better utilization of the space that we have in order to better facilitate the athletes that we have. This is the area that is in the upper gymnasium. So the new gym is down here. This is the upper or old gym. The idea here would be to turn the backside of the gym with where there is currently basically storage for any manner of gym equipment and basketball equipment. Moving that wall slightly to the north, enlarging that storage space slightly, opening it up with some windows that would overlook the field, as well as some windows that would overlook into the gymnasium, and turn that into the fitness center.
So one part that I talked about, right, I think last time for those who were here when I referenced building off of the existing structure. So this is the hallway right now outside of the upper gym that is just a hallway to get to another area of the building. Has electricity, has heat. It's not all those pieces, but it looks down into the courtyard. So what we're saying is make sure that utilizing those existing resources and not creating a new area of the building to save on infrastructure that and you bump out to create those again reutilizing existing space that we can actually use that counts against us as instructional space, but that we can actually now use as instructional space and then convert other spaces that potentially doesn't exist yet, but because we're building off the existing footprint, we have our dollar to stretch further and we can create some of those collaborative spaces.
Thanks for stealing my thunder, Mike. That was the next slide. So we got the old gymnasium covered here. Here's the auditorium and the cafeteria spaces, what they look like now. We're envisioning something that is more along the lines of a warm, inviting place, especially for the cafeteria. Obviously, the auditorium is sort of a box that's sort of fixed in space now. But if you could imagine having nicer new chairs, better equipment, and an updated look to the auditorium, I think that's what we have in mind in those spaces. Here are the lockers that Mike were talking about. See, the kids don't use the lockers at all. They actually leave their backpacks right in front of the lockers, right? So wouldn't it be great if we had some pub-style seating in the hallway with outlets where they could charge their Chromebooks and work out in the hallway independently? It's not a perfect solution, but it is a good solution for the space that we have. Here's our existing boiler and heating infrastructure. The boiler is original to the building. As you can see, that hole is not supposed to be there, right? So these things are failing and they're failing quickly, and it's things that we need to do. These are the things that are included as part of this bond that we need, that we desperately need to do. This space here is what we are considering for the special ed suite. This room is currently, or most recently, was the photography room. This area was formerly known as home ec. This is the art room as it stands now. This is the clay room. This boxed out area here is the upper level of the band room, which is below. Several years ago, as we were finishing up spending down the $52 million bond, one of the projects that we ended up having to do was part of this suite right here. So we had a desperate and crushing need to expand the special ed space at the building. And looking forward and looking ahead, we're trying to solve this problem in a way that we would be able to not put bad money after good. So we had just finished making all these renovations to this building, getting it where we needed to be. We just finished renovating the library, renovating the light science skill spaces at the high school and the front office, and we wanted to continue adding on to that. Right. So we devised this sort of a scheme where we took this area here. We kind of had this sort of a scheme laid out for several years now. And what we ended up doing was constructing these two spaces right here. So this is what is now the kitchen in the life skills area. And this was the kitchen that we had designed for the future life skills suite, which is what you see here. Right. So we have a life skills kitchen, a laundry area, a bedroom, a bathroom where we can instruct and help students with their transition into their adult life. These are some of the spaces that we need to go along with it. These are private instructional spaces, and this would be an area for APE. So we've had this in mind for a very long period of time. Obviously, in order to construct all of this, we need to move all of these art spaces somewhere else. And so the area that we're looking to move, the clay and art and photography rooms, is the area that is now known as underground storage. And it sounds terrible, but it will be great. So underground storage sort of ends somewhere in this area. If you can imagine, this is sort of an empty dark space. This area is part of the courtyard. We're looking to expand that underground storage out into the courtyard to invite a lot of that natural light and beauty into the art spaces and be able to recreate these spaces down here. So you've got a photography dark room, obviously in a dark room. And then you've got these other photography and the other art spaces facing out into the courtyard where they're getting that natural light and beauty, along with and in conjunction with these 8 classrooms. There's 4 here and there's 4 on the second level, which are intended, I think, to be maker spaces and STEM type spaces, along as flexible spaces for the student learning. Obviously, we can see the renovated locker rooms here in that area. This is what those rooms would look like in a 3-dimensional view. Again, this portion of the building exists. This portion does not, right? So this would be new construction. This is a look at some of those 8 classrooms. This was the lower level, bottom 4. And if you can think of the building the way that it was originally built, you could walk always all around the top floor in one big circle. And the bottom floor, you had to go down a set of stairs, and it was kind of a C shape. And you went around to one end, and then you had to walk back the other way, right? So putting this in here and this hallway through the art spaces is going to have one continuous loop through the bottom level, one continuous loop through the top level. This set of classroom, this is your exterior wall right now to the courtyard. These classrooms would all be in addition on into the courtyard, right? So 4 classrooms on that floor, and then another 4 classrooms, 3 classrooms and a flexible space on the second floor. This is your old gym. This is sort of your old gym lobby. This is where the guidance currently is, right? So you're going to walk up the set of stairs, and instead of just seeing a blank wall right here where you're looking into the courtyard, this is where those classrooms go, obviously utilizing that hallway that already exists for traffic flow purposes. And now I'll give it over to Derek to talk about the future of the Eldredge School.
Great. Thank you so much, Bob. So I will try and be brief because I know we've been long. We have just a few pieces of content left, but as you noticed earlier, absent from all of them was Eldredge. So want to take a moment to acknowledge that. Happy to take any questions later to the extent that there are any. But I'm sure all of you know Eldredge, the iconic building from the 20s on a hill right downtown. And we're talking about essentially moving away from early elementary in that building. So in terms of where we are, there had been proposed $8 to $10 million of renovations in the mid-90s. Now, kind of looking at what it would take to bring the building up to some of the images that the superintendent spoke of earlier in terms of what's needed versus what's required. It's more likely that a $25 million investment is needed to bring the building up to what it should be to accommodate 21st century learning. With that in mind, based on space standards and the overcrowding discussions we've been having, the other thing that we would need to do in order to accomplish that would be to right size the internal spaces and classrooms in the building, which would effectively mean that we would need to redistrict about half of the current school. And we go from an approximate student body of 300 students in that school, who are very tightly packed, as I had met with the PTG pretty recently, down to about 150. So what does this mean? This really means that though it is an iconic building, because there is a limit to the amount of funding we could put forth at any one time, there are orders of priority that we must address in terms of, broadly speaking, equity in elementary education, the high school, maintenance here at Cole, and everything else. It becomes prohibitively expensive for minimal impact in terms of teaching and learning to try and maintain Eldredge as a center for elementary education. In addition, based on the realignment of the grades that your superintendent had talked about in terms of his vision and mission for education in the school district, it kind of takes away from the establishment of the early childhood learning center, pathways up through elementary school, on to middle and high. We're now looking at another building that's housing a select number of students. And so with all of that in mind, what we had done over the past couple of years, and we present this to you as a reminder tonight, and also just to imagine what Eldredge could be. It is not uncommon that communities fall in love with their buildings from the turn of the century. Eldredge is absolutely a beautiful building, immediately adjacent to downtown, walkable from district offices, walkable from town hall. But what could it be if it's not going to be a school? And there actually is significant precedent in other communities turning historic buildings, historic municipal buildings into other buildings to serve other municipal purposes that are absolutely still important community assets that provide real value. Ultimately, that will be for you all, the residents of East Greenwich, to decide what your Eldredge will become. Thankfully, as many of you may be aware, about every 10 years, you put together a comprehensive master plan in terms of city planning. Your next one is due in the coming years. And so I would anticipate that although Eldredge will not close for likely another 5 to 6 years as we go through the kind of the process of making these capital improvements, putting these new buildings online, moving students into new schools. So Eldredge continues to exist as it does now for another 5, 6 years. It may want to become something in the future. And so that's where the community can start to talk to town council, can start to talk to the town manager's office, can start to talk with each other about what it might become. And with that in mind, my other slides were cut, which is good because we're very late. But the idea is it can become anything. There's precedent that says it's an arts center, or it's this, or it's that, but it becomes a community conversation. It's an absolutely iconic building, and I can understand why the community loves it. And so I encourage you to continue to imagine what it may be in its next life.